Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. It's been 9 months since Russia invaded Ukraine and the war continues to rumble on. Thousands have been killed, many more injured, as millions of Ukrainians have been forced to flee their homes. The impact of this war also being felt across the world as energy and food prices soar. And watching this very closely have been Russia's neighbours, 5 of those countries led by women, including Salome Zurabishvili, the President of Georgia, who I'm delighted to say joins me in the studio today for this special edition. Madam President, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
The war in Ukraine directly impacted Georgia last September when the Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that partial military mobilisation, resulting in thousands of people, primarily men, fleeing to your country. That's placed a lot of stress on Georgia, hasn't it?
Yes and no. First of all, the war, since it has started, has indeed impacted Georgia very directly. Because it has reminded us of the invasions that we have known on our territory from Russia. For Georgia, it's not something new. We have these occupied territories, 20% of the country where we have Russian military bases. They are 30 kilometers away from the capital city. So that's a very heavy presence, I would say, of Russia, always reminding us what Russia is really about. And seeing Ukraine in the same situation and seeing the international community finally realizing what is Russia is something that is very important for the whole region. And of course, the latest arrival after the Ukrainian refugees that also have come to Georgia has been received by the Georgian population in a mixed way. First of all, they were, of course, very worried. What does it mean? Who are those people that are coming? Are they, among them, provocateurs? Is it a Russian hybrid strategy again or something of that kind? And then there was also some sympathy because there are among them those people that are fleeing mobilization. And among them, there are Georgians that have been living in Russia since the Soviet times, and that now do not want to continue living in this country. And the end result is that now it has been almost 10 months. We didn't have any serious incident between either our local Georgian population and the Russians, nor between the Ukrainian refugees and the Russians. So it means that there is some form of acceptance in the country and tolerance and coexistence. That is probably the mark of this country over the centuries.
Now, I want to ask you, if Russia was led by a woman, would we be having this war in Ukraine?
It's very difficult to say. I've asked myself this question many times. I'm sure that it couldn't be worse. But it's very difficult to be sure because it will be a woman that it would be completely different. But if this huge room that was filled with military and other political personnel to which Putin is addressing himself, if in that room there was a majority of women, then things would be certainly different.
As it turns out, 5 of Russia's neighbours are led by women. Are you frequently all in touch with one another?
I am very much in touch. I was just a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I think, in Moldova, meeting with Maia Sandu. I was very impressed by her and by her prime minister. They're both women, leading one of the countries that is in the most difficult situation right after Ukraine because of this complete energy blockade in which they are finding themselves and direct pressure from Russia and direct internal pressure on the streets that is clearly manipulated also by Russia. So I was pleading to have her supported more directly and more efficiently by the international community, by the European community. And I'm very happy to see that Ursula von der Leyen went to Moldova and delivered this message of support, of solidarity, and of direct aid for surmounting the energy crisis and for allowing Moldova to breathe a little bit freer over this coming winter.
Now, early in the year, you held a meeting in Tbilisi of women leaders focusing on conflict resolution. Is it right to say that women are better at making peace, or is that just a sweeping generalisation?
I think that they have different outlooks. And the conference that we've had and that we're going to repeat next year, it is going to be a permanent feature for us, is women, not only women in politics, but women in culture, in economy. What is it and how do they participate to creating a world that is more secure, that is more peaceful, where conflicts are overcome? And I think that viewed in that sense, that women from all horizons together can create a different world, that I'm sure is possible. So it's not only their decisions as political leaders that make the difference, it's when women are represented in all the spheres of the society and can express their voice. Culture is extremely important, education is extremely important, business is very important to create this more stable world that avoids conflicts.
Now, in August this year, 48 members of the Georgian parliament issued a statement condemning Georgian Dream, the ruling party, saying it's with the claims that it had made, that is the Georgian Dream, that its strategic allies were forcing it into a war with Russia, a sign of perhaps just how polarised your country is when it comes to relations with Moscow.
It's not polarized when it comes to relations with Moscow. The argument of the Second War was more of an internal argument to justify this or that. But I think that if there is one thing on which we are not polarized, it's a relation with Moscow, because we have 20% of the country that is occupied, where we cannot go, where people cannot come out, where they're hostage taking every other day. So that is a constant reminder that with Russia, as long as Russia doesn't change, there cannot be a different policy. We're polarized on everything else that is internal politics. And there too, I must say, there is less polarization among the women. I've been able to meet with women of all the different parties coming together in an informal way. That's not something that is formally recognized. It's not a group. But we have been discussing the issues, and we have been looking at how we could play a role to help Georgia fulfill the 12 recommendations of the European Union that are expected from us in order to get the status of the candidate.
I want to ask you, though, do you feel that you're getting enough support from Europe and the West in general, especially in view of what's happening now with the war in Ukraine?
No, and no. I think that Georgia got a message when we didn't get the status of candidate, when Moldova and Ukraine got it. We understood why it was, and we also understood that it was a form of warning that we were not doing all the things in the latest period that we had to do. That being taken, and that I think is understood by the whole society, today is a very crucial time. Moscow needs to know that Georgia is protected as much as Moldova and Ukraine, is as much close to the European Union, and represents an important strategic asset for the European Union. There should not be today, when Moscow is losing, is retreating from Kherson, it shouldn't be an idea that there is a gray zone called Georgia, where maybe Moscow could get a new revanche or something of that kind. And that is very important. I think it doesn't cost too much to the European Union to grant the status of candidate. It's clear that the reforms have to be made, will have to be made. There is no other way to integrate finally the European Union. But today, to make it sure that there is no new line that is driven there, it's important that Georgia gets the candidate status as soon as possible.
And finally, one last question about your country. It is indeed a very young democracy, and that comes with all the inherent problems, as you yourself has witnessed. But it's also a very traditional country. Child marriage is still an issue. We even hear of cases to this very day of bride kidnapping. So with this in mind, how difficult is it for a person like yourself and for women in general to change the attitudes of Georgian society when it comes to things such as women's rights and the rights of the gay community and so on?
Well, I would say it's more an already made idea about Georgia that it's traditionally seen that way, because when one looks at the map, one thinks that we're closer to Asia or something. One has to remember that we are one of the two oldest Christian countries. We were Christianized by a woman. We've had many women that were reigning in Georgia. And women have always played a very important role, and they're playing today a very important role. The first democratic Georgia before the Russian invasion in 1921 had women participating in the elections, being elected, including Muslim women, because they were the minority. They are the minority. So it's a very contrasted country where there is some forms of tradition. You mentioned the brides, but often it's with the consent of the bride, and it's something that is really recurrent of the past, which doesn't really happen those days. But it's also a country that allows the women to be very present in the different spheres of the society, but politics, which they are not so much eager to join. So I hope that having a woman president, which, by the way, did not create any issues of among the society of people that were rejecting the idea of having a woman. It was very softly accepted. There were other things that were controversial, because it's always a very polarized society, but not the fact of being a woman. And I must say that even in politics, those women that are in politics are probably the most interesting politicians. So we'll see more of them.
Madam President, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for this special edition of the 51%. So until our next show, bye for now.